Welcome back to Final Cut Pro 10.1 In Depth. We are continuing our discussion of how to update our software, Final Cut Pro 10, and make sure all of our projects and events and everything shows up where they're supposed to. Mark's going to actually take us or walk us through the process in Final Cut Pro and some of the things that you need to kind of be aware of and some gotchas and essentially a roadmap for how to properly do it.
Yeah, and it's actually very easy, especially if you did this stuff in part one and preparing. This part's a breeze. So this is more of understanding what's going on, because honestly, for most people, you can click update and you're done and you're moving forward and you're great. But it's a good idea to understand what's happening.
Well, especially since some people's, I would imagine, projects and events are fairly complex with lots of clips, lots of offline. You know, some people aren't exactly organized.
Yeah, I'm one of them. I'm one of them.
Right,
You've got stuff on drives all over the place. So you really kind of want to understand what's going on. So in order to do that, I do want to explain a little bit about how the updating process, what it actually does, okay? So we'll come back to this dialog here. This is a dialog we started with when you launch Final Cut Pro 10.1 for the first time. This is what shows up. So this is what you need to decide to do. And we already talked about the new library model, how it collects projects and events together in the same library. And we talked a little bit about how to get ready. So what I want to talk about now is before you choose which button, what button do you press? There's three. Here's what's actually going to happen. And I'm going to talk about the update all. If you click update all. So we'll start from the right and move over. Let's start with update all. So if you do update all, this is what's going to happen. What's going to happen is Final Cut Pro 10.1 is going to scan every connected volume. Directly connected volume, okay? Not network volumes. So just keep that in mind for a minute. These are directly connected volumes. Your boot drive, any Thunderbolt connected drives, FireWire, USB 3, whatever you got. It's going to check all those. If it finds the Final Cut Pro projects and events folders, then what it's going to do for every drive that has those folders, it's going to create a new library on that drive, okay? So by default, you're going to get on one library on each volume. You can change this later, but by default, this is what it's going to do. It's going to scan those. If it finds those two folders,
Final Cut projects and Final Cut events,
yep,
it's going to coalesce it into one single library on that volume.
On that volume. So for instance, let's look at this volume A here we have. So let's just look at volume A. So specifically what it's going to do here, here's the library, the brand new 10.1 library on volume A. And what it's going to do then is going to take all the events that it finds on that volume and it's going to stick them in that library, and all the associated media and symlinks or reference files. So what I mean by that is if your existing events in Final Cut Pro 10.0.9 contain, often they might contain the actual original media files, but they could contain references, right?
Symlinks.
Symlinks,
what
yeah.
What I like to call poser files.
Poser files, right. So when all final versions of Final Cut 10 have had this where you don't have to actually bring all the media into the event. It can live externally. So what 10.1 is going to do is basically exactly the same thing that you already have. So if your media is already inside the event in the earlier version of Final Cut Pro 10, it's going to put it inside the event in this library. If it's referencing external media with those symlinks, it's going to do the same thing. Okay, so if you have external media somewhere, it's not going to mess with it at all.
That's
okay,
great.
It's going to leave it alone. And that's actually a very important thing to know. When you have external media, Final Cut Pro 10.1 is never going to delete it or move it or anything.
It stays where it is.
Yeah, so this is exactly what happens. That's kind of stage two. Stage one is creating a library. Stage two is putting the events and media in it, including the symlinks. And then stage three is to put the projects into an event.
Right. Formerly, the projects existed in their own separate library. Now Final Cut automatically is taking those projects from that library and putting it in this unified library.
Yeah, but inside an event. So that's basically the process it's going to go through. Okay? Coming back to this dialog box, that's what's happened when you click on Update All. If you click Update Later, what it means is you're just not going to update anything. It'll launch Final Cut Pro 10 with an empty library and an empty event.
So you'll have one empty library, one empty event.
Yeah, it's just like, hey, I don't want to update anything. Either you don't have anything, or you don't want to do.
You're just still scared.
Yeah. The good news is you can do it later. Yeah. Okay, you can always update later. So if you just want to open 10.1 and look around and check it out, click Update Later. It'll still launch Final Cut Pro 10, and you'll be ready to go. The final one, Locate, will allow you to manually create a library for specific hard disk, folder, or SAN location. I mentioned earlier that Update All will only look at directly connected volumes, but Locate will go to any network volume if you have projects and events on a network. Or let's say you've updated, but you didn't connect a drive. Like, oh, I forgot to.
So I need to locate that volume with the Final Cut Events and Final Cut Projects.
Exactly, exactly. So that's what we're going to actually do here is use that locate button. So before we do, I just want to show you that here I have a mounted volume. It happens to be a disk image, but this is be true for any mounted volume. I'll open it up, and it has Final Cut Projects and Events. So it's one of the volumes that will be updated, okay? But I'm actually going to locate it directly. And the reason I want to show you it before we update is because I want to see exactly what's going to happen, okay? So if we look in the event folder in here, I've got 3 separate events, and these are the same events we saw earlier when we were looking at Final Cut Pro 10.0.9. We've got a music video. If I pop that open, we see this original media has all the source media, okay? So these are the actual media files in there. And if I open various, we have symlinks. So there's no media in here. They're just pointers to the media that's on an external location. And by the way, don't worry if you don't actually see, if you try to actually find it, it doesn't play. It doesn't matter. It's still pointing to the right location. You'll get there. So let me close that, and I'll look at the last one. And this one, Winery Clips, has all the actual media. So the point here is before we upgrade to recognize that 2 of these events, music video and winery clips, have the actual media, and this one called various, this event, has symlinks. Okay? So with that in mind, let's go to Final Cut Pro 10.1, and since I skipped originally, you didn't see me do it, but I actually clicked Update Later.
Right.
So I can always go back.
Everyone, they can do it later.
You can do it later. So here, how do you do it later? Okay, here it's later. Well, here we are. What do? Go into the File menu and choose Update Projects and Events. Okay, so you can always get back to it. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and click on Locate. And that will bring up a browser. You can browse to any volume. And if you select a volume that doesn't actually have anything to update on it,
you get a warning.
It just won't it won't let you update. So here I've selected this remote disk. The update's dimmed out. Okay, it doesn't see any projects or event folders.
Well, it actually tells you the current selection is not valid.
Yeah, it even says, hey, there's nothing there. But if I click on this one, I actually made this volume called Updating.
Right.
And it says that it sees them, because I can choose Update.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and do it. Boom. And it's going through, it's looking at it, and it's doing those steps of building the libraries, building all the pieces. It says media files are missing.
Well, you told them in the previous lesson,
Yeah.
you deliberately said, we're not going to do anything about it, and we're not going to relink these media files.
I left a clip offline, and I left a clip from a missing event.
Yep.
So on purpose. So let's say, okay, I'm going to say, okay. And then it says, do I want to move the old projects and events to the trash? So again, referring back to our preparatory lesson, we talked about backing up your projects and events. If you didn't, you still have an opportunity.
It's just going to move it to the trash. You can just fish them out of there later.
Or let's just say, I'm not going to move them out right now. I'm going to choose Save. So I don't want to put them in the trash, because there's something else I'm going to want to show you in a little bit about that. Okay, so let's take a look at what happened in Final Cut Pro 10.1. First of all, let me just close this up. So we have a brand new library, and the name of the library is the same as the name of the volume from which it came, Updating. Remember, 1 library per volume with a volume name. If I open this library up, we have 4 separate events contained within it. We have the 3 events that we saw previously in 10.0.9, the music video event, the various event that has the missing clip. So remember, we chose not to relink the file before updating. And as you can see, it's once again offline after updating. So you could always choose to do so afterwards. It really doesn't matter. So we just go to the File menu and use the same relink files command to locate that file. And then we have the Winery Clips event. So all 3 of our events have been replicated in Final Cut Pro 10.1, but we also have this updated projects event. So this event is where all projects that Final Cut found when it scanned that volume are located. It's where it puts them all. Now, you may choose to place these within the associated events, which I recommend, and we'll get to that in part 3 here, but by default, to make it easy to find all your projects, because you might not realize what event you would associate with, Final Cut automatically puts them all in this particular event called Updated Projects. Another thing to notice if we open this up is there's a keyword collection called Music Videos. So if you remember when we looked in 10.0.9, we actually had a folder of projects. It only had 1 project in it, this tiny little Blackouts project. But the idea is this: if you've created folders of projects in 10.0.9 or earlier, when you update, Final Cut Pro 10.1 will assign a keyword collection to all the projects that were in each of those folders. So the folder name was music videos, and now this project has been tagged with that keyword, so it's part of this keyword collection. So you can immediately locate all the related projects that you've stuck in a folder. It's easy to find them once you update to 10.1. One more thing to notice here is if we open up the Quintessa Charles project, just like before, the last clip is offline, but if you'll remember, in 10.0.9, it actually said it was a missing event because it didn't know where the event was that the file was part of. But now in 10.1, events and projects are all contained within the same library, so you will never see a missing event warning. It's really impossible in the new model to have a missing event. You can of course have a missing file because we never did relink it, so once again we could go to the File menu and choose to relink that file. But you won't have a missing event anymore, which is a great new thing that everything's going to be contained in the same library. So now what I want to do, we've seen it how it worked in here, and basically it replicated everything, exactly like we saw, with the exception that it created this extra event for kind of these homeless projects. But let's go to the Finder and see what happened, okay? So here we are back in the same volume. There's our original, actually these two folders were created by Event Manager 10 when it managed these. So those are the same. It also has this updating old Final Cut projects and events folder. So that holds the original events and projects because we chose not to throw them away, okay? And then there's this new thing, which is the new library, okay? And this is what's really cool. This guy has everything in it. Now, it's not a folder, so it looks kind of self-contained, and the intention is that you don't really need to open it.
It's actually called a bundle.
It's a bundle, yeah. It's a little bundle. And in general, you do not need to open these. And Final Cut will take care of everything, but we're going to.
Yeah, we want to see its busty innards.
Exactly, we want to see its busty innards. So we're going to show, I'm right-clicking, show package contents, and here we see our events.
Which really points out that events are actually just folders at the Finder level that are stuck inside of a protected folder called a bundle.
Exactly. So let's take a look at what we've got here. At the top is this current version.flexo library, and this is the database for the entire library. Then we have folders for each of the events that we saw in Final Cut Pro. The top one is the updated projects. So these are each of the projects located in this event, as well as the database for the event and a render files folder. In the music video event in this folder, we have the media. If we look in the media, you can see it's all the original source media. So just like we saw in 10.0.9, this media has been copied into the media folder. So it's in the event. The actual media is in the event, same as it was in 10.0.9. If we look in the various event, in this folder, this original media here are actually symlinks. So there are references or pointer files to the location of that original media. The original media, since it was outside the event, is not touched at all. These pointer files are still pointing to it. So it was just these pointer files or these symlinks that were copied into this original media folder. So it's exactly the same again as it was in 10.0.9. And finally, with the winery clips, in this we once again have all the original media. There's a few more things to understand about this. So that's the basic thing, is it brings in everything exactly the way you would expect. Now, here's something you might want to think about. It looks like, if I go back out to this overall volume level, it looks like we have all of the original events and projects, and then we have everything basically duplicated into this library.
You would think so.
Right, so you would think that it's going to double up the amount of disk space that it takes. And therefore, you might think, I better plan ahead, because if I have a drive that, say, is 3/4 full of projects and events, and it's all original media, and if it's going to double it, it won't fit on that volume.
Right.
But this is where Final Cut does a really, really cool thing. I absolutely love this, but it can be a little bit confusing. If you don't think about it, you don't, basically the rule is you don't need to worry. Final Cut actually doesn't take any extra space up, even though it appears to be making copies of all that media. Okay.
Well, I want to know how it does it.
Yeah.
What's the magic behind it? What's the magic?
Here's the magic. So let's go in here and we'll talk about post-update a little bit, which is what we've been discussing. What happens post-update? So there's these things called hard links, okay? So we've been talking about these poser files as references. There's something else called hard links. And generally, you don't have to understand this, but if you get it, you'll get exactly why no extra space is required in the update process, okay? Here we have our volume, and let's say it's a 1 terabyte volume. And we've got our original Final Cut projects and events, the old 10.0.9 ones, and we've got the new library. And let's say that the original projects and events, let's say all the media was inside them, okay? Let's say it was 700 gigs of data. And if you measure it after the update process, the Finder will tell you it's 700 gigs. If you measure the library, it will tell you it's 700 gigs.
There should be 1,400 gigs of content.
Right. But if you get info on the volume itself will be 700 gigs.
What?
Okay, yeah, so like what's going on? So this is what's happening, and this is what's kind of cool, but can be a little bit confusing. Let's say you've got clip A in the original event and clip A in the library. They are not symlinks. They don't have the little hooked arrow. It's hard media. But in reality, those are what are called hard links to that original source media file in its original location.
So what you're saying is, when you go to the Finder and get info, the Finder doesn't even understand hard links.
It really doesn't. It's really underneath the operating system this is going on.
It's under the radar.
It's under the radar. So there are 3 implications to understand about this, okay? If you ignore this part, that sort of the total space taken up, if you measure them separately, is going to confuse you. But you look at the total drive space, it's the right number. The right number, it still takes up 700. Okay. Actually, a little bit more because you're duplicating projects or small files. Right. So it's a little bit more, but not much. Or it could actually be smaller because any render files that you might have had in your original projects are not copied over. So the new library could actually be smaller than your original folders. But here's the implications of this. First of all, when you update a volume, it's not going to take any extra space, or I should say very little extra space. So basically, you don't need to worry about it. If you have a very full drive, and you update that drive, it's not going to take much.
That's huge. I'm sure the engineers thought about that.
Yeah,
it's going to happen.
It's brilliant because of this process. But it's still making copies of the media, which is kind of crazy, but it's true. And the other thing, it's really fast. Because these are hard links, it's not duplicating the media. So the update process, you might think, oh, I have gigs and gigs and gigs of projects and events to update all this media. It's going to take forever.
No.
It goes so fast because of this hard link things. The second thing is, when you delete those old projects and events, it's actually not going to free any space up. That is, unless you have a lot of render files in your old Final Cut projects and you haven't yet rendered anything in the new library, then you will save some space because you'll be deleting those render files. So let me explain exactly what I mean by that, because I know that sounds a little weird here. But if we go back to this example where we have our old updated project and events here, okay? So let me get info on the size of that. So that thing is 1.28 gigabytes, right? If I get info on this guy, which is the new library, it's 1.2, it's a little bit less, it's about the same. But if I get info on the overall drive, it's, where is it?
2.
2, because I have a couple other little things in there, but it doesn't really add up.
It doesn't add up.
Because it's hard links. So,
Right.
So the thing is, if I were to delete this now, it actually wouldn't free any space up, because the underlying media is really being pointed to one copy of the media.
Right.
Okay. So
that's a really important. For people are going to trash that and go, why didn't I get any space back?
Right.
Well, because
Here's
you're
why.
not really deleting media.
Exactly. And then the third implication of that, by the way, is that if you do take those old projects and events and move them to another drive, then that breaks the hard link and will make hard copies of each. And then each one would take 700 gigs. 700.
Right. And then it would take a while to transfer.
Then it would take a while to copy.
Gigs.
Right.
Got it.
Right. So it's kind of cool that if you were to take this folder here of old things and drag them to another drive, it will do a full copy.
So the Finder then knows, okay, I need to take all this stuff with me.
Then they're completely separate.
You can take it with you.
You can take it with you. So that's just kind of the thing that happens there. So that's kind of how hard links work.
So now that you've watched Mark walk through the process of actually updating your legacy projects and events folder, you can see that Final Cut Pro pretty much handles everything. It's pretty much worry-free. Click Update Go, and you don't have to update right then. You can update later, as you saw. So the Apple engineers did a tremendous job of making this a a painless process.
And there are some very significant implications to this whole library model as we get more into talking about media management. But that's right. The actual update process is fast and pretty simple, given that we have a kind of a new structure that we're working with.
Excellent. So you want to check out the last lesson because it's
Yeah, we'll talk about a few things to do after updating.
okay. Post update.
Post update.